What's up, YouTube? It's your boy JP's on the keys, and it's too easy this video today. I know y'all wanted some history, and I seen Epic History got a whole bunch of videos that I need to catch up on. But I wanted to do this first because I feel like this was interesting to me. This is every country that England has invaded. So before we get to that, I just want to let y'all know that I just dropped a gaming video yesterday on my gaming channel. The link to the gaming channel is in the description. Check that out, because I'm about to be done with school for a minute. I'm about to be on break. I got a whole bunch of time to be recording videos, so I'm gonna need y'all to drop me some suggestions. I need a bunch of. I'm thinking of ideas, but I'm talking about just like suggestions in terms of what videos to react to and stuff. But I plan on doing a whole lot of like documentary based content, like a bunch of documentary based content. Like, yeah. But it always amazes me in terms of this, how a country so small in size literally controlled the whole world at one point, was dominating countries that were thousands of miles away. But let's just watch.
It was made possible by CuriosityStream. Watch all of my videos.
But CuriosityStream is fire though. That's a good service. Like, that's a good. They have good stuff on there.
Videos early and ad-free, or watch my upcoming original series exclusively on Nebula, which you can get access to for $15 a year through the bundled deal at curiositystream.com/real-life-lore. For a good chunk of the past few centuries, this music.
I don't know, bro. I also thought about putting my documentaries on a separate channel. I thought about it. Maybe like the sports channel, or making it into like a documentary. I don't know. But I'm still thinking. But
music was the final boss music played for people across the entire world. The English and later the British have been responsible for invading and conquering more countries and people than any other nation in human history. And honestly, it's startling just how many places they've been to. In this video, I'm going to do my best at attempting to visualize all of Britain's invasions and conquests for you, continent by continent, in as brief a time as possible. So let's begin with the closest continent to Britain, Europe. Ireland was the first target of British conquests and was invaded as early as 1169. Within 400 years of gradual conquests, the entire island was ruled by the British and remained that way until most of it was granted independence in 1921. Historically,
800 years. I seen it was like the arguments between the USA and the US, and somehow, well, people in the UK is like, well, at least we have free healthcare over here. Well, then someone's like, well, at least we're not the reason why half the world has an Independence Day. Oh. I was like, wow.
France has probably been invaded by the English more times than any other country in the world. Just take a look at this huge list of invasions. Damn! There's not even enough time to talk about a third of these, and for a time, all of this territory inside of modern France was directly controlled by the English, with Calais being the final piece that fell in 1557. Well, except for that time when the British took over Corsica for a couple years. The British continued to invade Spain by the millions every winter, but in the past, they've come with a lot less friendly intentions. English and later British soldiers invaded under the Black Prince in 1367 and continued on through the first, second, third, and fourth raids on Cadiz, and that time when the British took over Gibraltar and Minorca. They gave Minorca back, but decided on keeping Gibraltar forever. In recent history, the British have invaded Belgium in order to support the Belgians. But that wasn't always the case. They conducted two pretty large-scale invasions of modern-day Belgium in 1654 and again in 1701. And Flanders itself was ruled by the English for a few years in the 14th century. The Netherlands was one of England's historical arch-rivals, and so there's been plenty of invasions going in this direction.
And they just beat my boys in the World Cup. It's like, nah, I knew the USA wasn't getting nowhere, bro. They just beat my boys in the World Cup. Yeah, whatever.
across the 17th and 18th centuries. In 1940, the British technically invaded and took over Iceland peacefully for a year in order to prevent it from falling into the hands of the Germans. But this was heavily protested by the Icelandic government at the time, so in my books it still counts as an invasion. Italy, of course, was invaded by the British Army during the Second World War as well in 1943, but there were plenty of invasions before then, dating back to Richard de Lionheart's invasion in 1190.
Oh
Germany,
my God!
was obviously invaded by the British Army in 1945.
Of course,
and
yeah.
Northwestern Germany was occupied by the British for 3 years until 1948, but a lot of German territory was ruled by Britain long before then. The islands of Heligoland were British for most of the 19th century, and the Kingdom of Hanover was effectively ruled under a personal union for over a century between 1714 and 1837. Austria was also invaded in 1945, and the southwest of the country was occupied for a decade.
Oh my
Norway
God, the
was
whole,
invaded in
all of
1810
Europe?
And 1812 during the Napoleonic Wars when it was a part of Denmark-Norway because Denmark was aligned to France, so obviously Denmark was invaded during that time as well. Finland, Estonia, and Latvia were all briefly invaded by small units during the Crimean War against Russia because they were all part of the Russian Empire at the time, and of course, Russia itself was invaded then too, as well as in 1918 when the British took over a large chunk of northern Russia for a time in their fight against the Bolsheviks. The territory of modern Ukraine was invaded by British army units during the Crimean War. The British took over the Croatian island of Vis between 1807 and 1814 during their fight against Napoleon. The British army had boots and guns on the ground in Bosnia recently between 1992 and 95 fighting against the Bosnian Serbs, and around the same time the RAF also carried out bombing strikes against Serbian Serb targets in Serbia in 1999.
Oh my! Oh, this is like not even. This is just Europe.
Montenegro was briefly blockaded and invaded in 1913 during the First Balkan War. The British owned the westernmost Ionian islands of Greece between 1815 and 1863 before they gave them back, while Bulgaria was invaded and almost entirely occupied by the British Army between 1918 and 1919 at the end of World War I. Cyprus was a British protectorate between 1878 and 1914 when they decided to just outright annex it to piss off the Turks, and it remained annexed until 1960, except for 2 small chunks that are still British today. Turkey itself was massively invaded by the British during World War I, and part of it was occupied between 1919 and 1923. That wraps up Europe, so let's move on to Asia next. Modern-day Israel and Palestine, as well as Jordan, were British controlled from the end of World War I to 1948 and 1946, respectively.
Oh, just wait till we get to Africa. Oh my God, that's going to be the whole continent. Oh, wow.
Lebanon and Syria were both occupied from the Vichy French government briefly during World War II. Iraq was ruled between 1990.
I mean, we're technically in Africa right now. What am I talking about?
In 1932 and invaded again during the Second World War and again in 1991 and again in 2003. Kuwait was a colony for over 60 years until 1966.
Oh my God,
Georgia
4
and
times!
Azerbaijan were both invaded and occupied right at the end of World War I for a year. Iran has been invaded at least 3 times, with the most notable example being the joint Anglo-Soviet invasion of 1941. Turkmenistan was invaded in 1918 to prevent Bolshevik influence from spreading any further. Afghanistan is a favorite British invasion spot since it's been invaded in 1839, 1878, 1919, and again in 2001. Qatar.
Oh, not just Afghanistan ain't just a favorite of the U.S. I mean, of the U.K. I just ruined my joke. These three seem to be, America invade land. All 3 of these countries. These really small countries in terms of surface area.
Bahrain, the United Arab Emirates, and Oman were all controlled by the British until the early 1970s, while a chunk of Yemen was controlled for over a century between 1839 and 1967. India, Pakistan, Bangladesh...
Oh yeah, Britain owned India for a long time, I know that.
Invaded many times and outright ruled by the British Empire in parts for nearly 2 centuries between 1757 and 1947. Nepal was invaded in 1814 but never successfully conquered. Bhutan was invaded in 1772 and again in 1864 and was sort of conquered as a protectorate between 1910 and 1948. Burma/Myanmar was invaded in 1826 and was definitely successfully conquered and ruled through 1947. Thailand was briefly invaded in 1945 since they were allied to Japan in World War II, and so was Vietnam in the same year, but that was to support the French government against the growing independence movement. Malaysia and Singapore were each conquered and ruled up until the 1950s and 1960s. Brunei was conquered and ruled up until the 1980s, whereas the Philippines were briefly invaded during the 7 Years' War. China got invaded a lot, and Hong Kong was a colony until as recently as 1997. And while not outright
97? Dang, bro, I didn't know that. I didn't know Britain literally owned a part of China 20 years ago, almost 20-some years ago.
Invaded, part of Japan was occupied following World War II between 1946 and 1952. And finally, Indonesia was invaded a bunch during the Napoleonic Wars since it was a Dutch colony allied to France at the time. Next up, Oceania. Australia and New Zealand, of course, were invaded by the British and
penal colonies.
Yeah,
penal colonies.
Papua New Guinea was also a British colony for a time, as were the island countries of Fiji, Kiribati, the Solomon Islands, Tuvalu, and Vanuatu. Let's move back.
I also read something about Kiribati that I was watching a documentary where there's literally, the island is so small, and the fact that the land has been so degraded by just the constant hurricanes and use of destruction of land, that their country will no longer exist in a few more years if the weather hits like that. Just think about that. Their country will not exist because it's not enough land to hold the amount of people that would be there, because the water from the tsunamis keeps destroying their land. So they won't have an island. So they have to try to move hundreds of thousands of people across all this water to Fiji just to make sure their whole home doesn't get destroyed. And that's wild. And people don't understand the impacts of climate change, even though I feel like it's irreversible at this point.
Over to Africa next, which the British have violently visited a lot.
The whole continent.
In terms of just places the British outright colonized after invasions, there's the Gambia, Sierra Leone, Ghana, Nigeria, Egypt, Sudan, South Sudan, Uganda, Kenya, Tanzania, Zambia, Malawi, Zimbabwe, Botswana, Namibia, and South Africa, along with parts of modern-day Somalia and Guinea. Senegal was briefly invaded and had some of their coastline taken over in the 1700s, while during the Second World War, the British invaded the French colonies of Djibouti, Madagascar,
Djibouti!
After they aligned themselves with the Nazi Vichy regime and the Italian colonies of Libya, Eritrea, and Ethiopia, although they had also invaded Ethiopia much earlier in 1868. And as German colonies right before World War I, the British also invaded Togo and Cameroon without annexing them afterwards. For the final area of the world left to discuss, let's move over to the Americas. All of Canada was a British colony until 1931, while Newfoundland remained until 1949. The United States, of course, was a colony until 1776, and was invaded again in 1812, and the modern states of Oregon and Washington were claimed right up until 1846.
Washington.
Other outright British colonies here go, there was the Bahamas, Jamaica, Belize, Grenada, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Barbados, St. Lucia, Dominica, Antigua and Barbuda, St. Kitts and Nevis, Trinidad and Tobago, and Guyana. Besides colonies, Cuba was invaded and occupied during the 7 Years' War in 1762. Haiti was invaded in 1793 during the French Revolutionary Wars. The Dominican Republic was...
And Haiti kicked they butt. Haiti got them French people up out of there. Yeah.
Invaded way back in 1655 in an attempt at conquest under Oliver Cromwell. Parts of the east coast of Honduras and Nicaragua were conquered and ruled for nearly 2 centuries until 1819. They sent the Navy to invade Mexico in 1861 to force them to repay some debts, and during the splendidly named War of Jenkins' Year, aka the more lame-sounding War of the Austrian Succession, the British invaded a lot of Spain's colonies, including Panama, a huge one into Colombia, and ultimately Peru. In 1796, the British took over Suriname because it was a Dutch colony, and they were allied with the revolutionary French and later Napoleon. They also invaded Martinique and Guadeloupe because they actually were French during the Napoleonic Wars. Venezuela was invaded in 1902 as part of the so-called Venezuela crisis to force the country to repay some debts they had defaulted on, kind of like Mexico, while Argentina and Uruguay were both invaded during the Napoleonic Wars as well in 1806 when Spain and her colonies were still allied with Napoleon. And that's pretty much sums up all of the territory the British have ever ruled and all of the countries this small island has ever invaded. There are a total of 65 countries today who celebrate their independence days from the British Empire.
Right.
The Empire used to rule over a quarter of all the world's land at the same time and was the biggest empire in human history. And in total, today, there have been 117 modern countries that have been aggressively invaded by the British armed forces during some point in their histories, representing a total of 60% of all the world's nations, which is almost the same number of countries that you can watch this video in. YouTube is available in 130 countries now, or about 2/3 of them, but the algorithm that YouTube uses won't always work the way you think or want it to. It determines which videos succeed, which ones don't, and which ones you end up seeing recommended, but it doesn't always line up with the kinds of videos I'm producing here that I think you guys will end up enjoying watching. So, about things like demonetization, video length...
Oh, okay, he did this at the end. But it's always crazy to think about how a country so quote-unquote small as the United Kingdom started out. Like England started out and just... But the thing is, you have to understand, Britain had the best navy in the world for hundreds of years. They had the best navy. They literally had you couldn't beat their navy. That's why they won so many wars. Because their naval forces were the best, because they're already sending thousands of people on ships. They're sending explorers on ships to go get spices. They're sending people on ships to do this and that and this and the third. They're obviously going to be experienced in naval warfare. And that's, like, I just find it crazy how you can control a country that is thousands of miles away from you. Like, think about a country like Britain they overtook, like, the 13 colonies, probably the biggest example. You're controlling a whole nation that is across an ocean, and you're still imposing rules from across the world. That's crazy. Like, the logistics of that, like having to send diplomats from country to country, probably had to be terrible. Like, and that system was so strong that it still exists in a way today. The monarchy still exists, even though it doesn't have like absolute governmental power like it used to have. But it's just unique to see that. But thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Leave a like, hit that subscribe button. Check out my gaming channel in the description. Also check out my Discord link in the description as well. I want you to please be safe. You know what I'm saying? Just please be safe. 2022 is coming to an end, man. This year has been weird and good to me. I hope it's been the same for you. But I hope you have a great day today. Leave a like if you enjoy. Hit that subscribe if you to the channel. Turn on my post notifications. Please be safe. Stay on the ground. Have a great day. I'm out. Peace.